Kevin Stefanski's decision-making has come under intense scrutiny as rumors swirl about the treatment of within the Cleveland Browns. Despite his undeniable talent and impressive leadership both on and off the field, Sanders has found himself seemingly sidelined in favor of other quarterbacks. His active community involvement and
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
poise under pressure are seen as qualities that could elevate the Browns, but it appears that those in charge are more concerned with maintaining control and protecting their own positions. The video suggests that behind the scenes, Sanders has been subjected to subtle, yet calculated moves to limit his exposure and involvement. This deliberate suppression of Sanders' potential, driven by fear, ego, and the desire for control, has led to a growing sense of frustration among fans and analysts. The video argues that the Browns' management, particularly Stefanski, is using tactics like shifting depth charts and citing injuries to keep Sanders from challenging for a starting role. As the narrative unfolds, it becomes clear that Sanders' rise cannot be stopped forever, and the truth about the Browns' internal politics will eventually come to the surface, with significant consequences for those who tried to suppress it. It's no longer just speculation. No longer just frustration from fans wondering why one of the most promising quarterbacks on the roster hasn't seen meaningful snaps. It's now a full-blown controversy, one that's pulled the curtain back on the inner workings of the Cleveland Browns and laid bare the dysfunction that's been operating under the surface all season. The leaks have changed everything. For months, questions have been circulating about why Shedeur Sanders, despite his evident talent, character, and leadership, has been sidelined. Why every time he seems to gain momentum, some injury stalls it? Why depth chart updates feel more like chess moves than football decisions? Why the play calling seems specifically designed to minimize his exposure? And now the answer's out. It's intentional, it's systemic, and it's about control. According to sources close to the organization, this isn't just about football, it's about politics, about protecting egos, about keeping a very specific hierarchy intact at all costs. And the one person disrupting that hierarchy just by existing? Sanders. The narrative being pushed internally is simple. Sanders isn't ready. He's still developing. He needs more time. But the actions contradict the words. Coaches like Kevin Stefanski have reportedly gone out of their way to limit Sanders' opportunities, not because he's underperforming, but because he's overperforming. Because he's making people nervous. Because his presence, his leadership, his raw ability on the field threaten to expose the uncomfortable truth. The Browns don't want a quarterback who leads, they want one who follows. That's why Dillon Gabriel was elevated to starting quarterback. Not because he's the better player, but because he's the safer one. Easier to manage. Easier to control. He fits into the system without demanding change. Sanders, on the other hand, doesn't ask to lead. He just does. And that's the problem. The playbook doesn't have room for someone who challenges the order, even if that challenge comes from nothing more than natural talent and earned respect. It's not just coming from the coaching staff either. According to the video, internal jealousy has been festering, particularly from figures like Anthony, who reportedly views Sanders as a threat to his standing. It's the kind of locker room tension that isn't sparked by poor behavior or ego on Sanders' part. It's sparked by his effectiveness, by his consistency, by the way teammates gravitate toward him. And for some, that's a threat, especially for those who've built their status within a tightly controlled, politically navigated environment. The most frustrating part? None of this has anything to do with whether Sanders can play. He can. The issue is that if he's given the opportunity, he might outshine the ones management has already invested in. And that would be inconvenient. It would expose decisions that weren't made based on performance or merit, but based on personal relationships and internal agendas. And it's not like Sanders hasn't earned the shot. He's been consistent, disciplined, quiet. He's kept his head down and worked. He's avoided drama. He hasn't spoken out publicly. He hasn't made noise. In fact, the only noise that's come from him is the kind that resonates in communities across Cleveland, because while the Browns have kept him out of the game, Sanders has made his presence felt where it actually matters. In the neighborhoods. In youth centers. In real spaces, far from the sterile image of the franchise face, the front office clings to. That's what makes this whole situation so transparent. The organization isn't just threatened by his ability on the field, they're threatened by what he represents off of it. Authentic leadership. Not manufactured, not marketed, not filtered through press teams. Just real, grounded connection. The kind you can't teach. The kind you can't fake. And the kind you absolutely cannot control. There are people in the building who prefer their players quiet, polished, and distant. Who believe influence should flow from the top down, not grow from the ground up. And Sanders flips that model on its head. He doesn't need them to shape his image, he is the image. And it's not the one they want. They want something safe, predictable, something they can package and sell. Sanders doesn't play that role. He doesn't fit in their box. So instead of embracing it, they've tried to contain it, to suppress it, to bury it beneath a carefully layered series of excuses, half-truths, and strategic depth chart manipulation. But the more they try to hide it, the more obvious it becomes. The mysterious back injury? It's a recurring excuse. One that seems to appear every time pressure builds for Sanders to see the field. One that never comes with clarity. One that's treated like an indefinite holding pattern. Just enough to justify keeping him out, but never enough to spark a real timeline for return. And fans have noticed. The patience is gone. The questions are sharper now. Louder. Less forgiving. Every week he's absent, the conspiracy feels less like theory and more like reality. The belief that he's being held back on purpose isn't fringe anymore. It's common sense. Because when you step back and look at the full picture, it becomes impossible to deny. The rotation moves. The silence from Stefanski. The strategic use of noise and distractions. The vague injury reports. The promotion of a less dynamic QB. The locker room politics. The internal jealousy. It's all connected. It's all deliberate. And it's all aimed at stopping one player from rising too far, too fast. But here's what leadership can't stop. The truth. They can shuffle the roster. They can manage the media. They can control the internal narrative. But they can't stop Sanders from being who he is. From winning over fans. From showing up in the community. From leading with integrity. From outworking everyone else. And they can't stop what's coming. Because no matter how tightly they grip the reins, the truth is breaking through. The story is out. The leaks are public. The narrative has shifted. And now, the Browns are in damage control. Not just because of what they've done to Sanders, but because of what it exposes about them. About how they operate. About what they value. About the culture they're cultivating. This isn't about one player. It's about an organization that chose politics over performance. Control over character. Ego over excellence. And it's going to cost them. Because you can't suppress leadership forever. Not when it's real. Not when it's earned. Not when the world is watching. Eventually, Sanders will get his shot. Whether in Cleveland or somewhere else, it's coming. And when it does, it won't just be a debut. It'll be an expose. A living, breathing reminder of what was denied. Of who tried to keep it hidden. And of the difference between a team that builds around its leaders and one that tries to silence them. Like this video if you see what's happening. Share it if you're done with the spin. Drop a comment if you're calling out the politics for what they are. And make sure you're subscribed, because this story's far from over. And when the truth finally hits the field, the fallout is going to be unforgettable. And when it hits, the organization won't be able to hide behind scheme talk or practice reps. They won't be able to pull out another recycled injury update or trot out a lifeless press conference to calm the storm. Because by then, it won't just be about Shedeur Sanders being benched. It'll be about how long they spent trying to convince everyone that wasn't what they were doing. The cracks in the story are already there. And they're not small. Why has the injury status been such a mystery? Why has it been a constant cycle of questionable, without any visible sign of setbacks or actual recovery benchmarks? Why are the media kept in the dark about his health, his role, and his timeline? Why is a player with this much talent and this much maturity being handled like a PR liability? The more questions fans ask, the fewer answers they get. And the more evasive the team becomes, the more obvious it is that something isn't right. Because this isn't just miscommunication. It's not indecision. It's strategy. A strategy designed to keep a player quiet. Not in attitude, Sanders hasn't made a single public misstep. He's said nothing out of line. He's caused no drama. The silence coming from him has been steady, patient, respectful. But the silence around him? That's not discipline. That's suppression. Calculated, institutional suppression. And it's coming from a front office and coaching staff that, let's be honest, have made keeping control a higher priority than cultivating talent. They're not building toward the future. They're maintaining a pecking order. One that's more concerned with image management than real leadership. Look at who's being protected here. Dillon Gabriel gets the full support of the organization. He's given room to breathe, space to make mistakes, and a public narrative that's been carefully curated to present him as the right choice. But what's fueling that support? Is it performance? Is it leadership? Not compared to Sanders. Is it community connection? Not even close. It's comfort. It's predictability. It's safety. Photos, Gabriel isn't a threat to the way things work. He's not shaking up the order. He's not pulling focus from the coaching staff. He's not going to become the story. But Sanders? Sanders already is the story, and that's what they can't stand. Because Shedeur Sanders doesn't need a rollout campaign. He doesn't need staged moments or post-game cliches. He leads without a script. He connects without a filter. He doesn't have to try to be the face of a franchise. He just is. And that terrifies people who've spent their careers deciding who gets to wear that label. So the play becomes delay. Mute the narrative. Limit the visibility. Buy time. But time is running out. Every game that passes without Sanders on the field chips away at the credibility of the people making these decisions. Every week of silence raises more doubt. Every snap that goes to someone else becomes another reminder that this isn't about competition, it's about containment. The Browns are stuck in a contradiction. On one hand, they preach competition, meritocracy, culture. On the other hand, they've clearly made decisions based on ego, insecurity, and a fear of losing control. They want to talk about building a team. But you don't build a team by tearing down your leaders before they can lead. And make no mistake, Shedeur Sanders is a leader. He's shown that on and off the field. Not just with his work ethic, but with his impact. His presence in the community isn't just admirable, it's powerful. It's meaningful. It's real. He's out there connecting with people, inspiring young fans, supporting youth programs, and showing up where it matters. Not because someone told him to, but because that's who he is. And that's what separates him. Because in a league full of branding campaigns and rehearsed interviews, Sanders doesn't need spin. He just shows up. And the Browns don't know what to do with that. Because when you've built your organization around carefully managed roles and top-down messaging, someone like Sanders feels dangerous. Because he doesn't need them to elevate him. He's doing it on his own. That's why they keep trying to control the narrative. That's why they've buried his snaps behind injury reports and shallow playbook excuses. That's why they've allowed jealousy to fester in the locker room unchecked. Because the rise of Shedeur Sanders doesn't just represent a player developing. It represents a shift in power, and that's what they fear the most. Photos, not talent. Not youth. Not even competition. Change. The kind of change that forces people in charge to answer hard questions. The kind of change that breaks patterns. That redistributes influence. That threatens people who've grown too comfortable making decisions without accountability. And they're running out of ways to avoid it. Because eventually, Sanders will get on the field. Whether by necessity, public pressure, or another team seeing what the Browns refuse to acknowledge, the opportunity will come. And when it does, there's a strong chance he won't just perform, he'll thrive. And when that happens, every single person who played a part in holding him back will have to explain why. Why did they suppress a player with clear potential? Why did they allow internal politics to take precedence over team growth? Why did they promote mediocrity to protect power? And why did they think no one would notice? They may not answer those questions now, but they won't be able to dodge them forever. Because the spotlight is shifting. The leaks have made sure of that. And no amount of controlled messaging can put the genie back in the bottle. Sanders has already won in one crucial way. He's exposed the system. He's made it clear that sometimes, being the best on paper isn't enough. Not when you're too real for people who only know how to operate in shadows. Not when your light threatens to outshine people who've built their careers keeping others in the dark. So now the Browns have a choice. They can keep doubling down on suppression. Keep pushing the same tired excuses. Keep pretending that keeping Sanders off the field is somehow part of the plan. Or, they can face what's coming. They can recognize what's in front of them. They can stop being scared of what Sanders represents and start embracing what he brings. Because what he brings is rare. And if they don't, someone else will. At this point, there's no spinning this. The Cleveland Browns aren't sitting on a quarterback controversy, they're standing on a credibility cliff. One more vague press conference. One more maintenance day, back injury update. One more week of strategic silence, and it all comes crashing down. Because the Shedeur Sanders story is no longer just about football. It's about trust. The trust between a franchise and its fans. The trust between leadership and the locker room. The trust between what's said in public and what's really happening behind closed doors. And right now, all of that is fractured. People can see the cracks. They're visible in the inconsistent messaging, in the cautious wording of coaches, in the empty praise for players who are being protected, not because they're producing, but because they're politically convenient. And the more the Browns try to act like this is business as usual, the more they expose just how not normal this situation is. Let's not forget, this isn't some unproven rookie floundering through camp. This is a quarterback with a legitimate resume, strong leadership instincts, and most importantly, a relentless presence in the community. Someone who has earned respect from fans without even stepping onto the field for a regular season start. And somehow, that's become a problem. Instead of leaning into that, instead of recognizing they have a potential franchise leader developing in real time, the Browns have treated Shedeur Sanders like a liability. Not because of what he's done wrong, but because of what he might do right. Because if he gets his shot and delivers, the entire narrative around this team changes, and so does the power structure inside it. That's the fear. That's what this has always been about. Photos, control. The kind of control that doesn't want unpredictable stars. That doesn't want players who influence culture. That doesn't want a leader whose light can't be dimmed to fit a pre-approved brand image. They don't want organic leadership. They want manufactured obedience. And Sanders doesn't fit that. He doesn't need their scripts. He doesn't need the talking points. He doesn't need to be told how to act, how to connect, how to lead. He just does. Naturally. Authentically. And when you've built an organization on politics, that's threatening. So instead of rewarding that leadership, they've spent this season downplaying it. First, it was about development. Then it was the adjusted depth chart. Then came the injury, a conveniently timed back issue that has seemingly persisted without clarity, specifics, or any visible impact during practice sessions. Each explanation more flimsy than the last. And through it all, Sanders has stayed composed. He hasn't lashed out. He hasn't stirred up drama. He hasn't even given the media a quote they could twist into controversy. He's kept working, kept engaging, kept showing up for the people around him, even when the people above him refuse to show up for him. That takes strength. That takes focus. And it takes character. All the things the Browns say they want, but clearly can't handle when it comes from someone they didn't pick to be their mouthpiece. What makes this worse is that it's not just fans noticing it anymore. Former players, analysts, insiders, they're all starting to say the quiet part out loud. That this feels like suppression. That this looks like sabotage. That the most obvious choice is being sidelined by people too proud to admit they got it wrong. And let's be honest, getting it wrong happens. No front office is perfect. But what doesn't happen in well-run organizations is a deliberate campaign to protect fragile egos by benching legitimate talent. The longer this continues, the more damage they're doing. Photos, not just to Sanders, but to themselves. Because what happens if he gets traded or signed by another team and thrives? What happens when the talent they couldn't see, or wouldn't let anyone else see, becomes undeniable under a different system? They'll look like fools. But worse, they'll look like manipulators. And once that perception sets in, it's hard to shake. Future players will think twice. Agents will remember. Fans won't forget. Because this isn't just about Shedeur Sanders anymore. It's about what kind of team the Browns are trying to be. Are they a team that rewards performance? Or protects politics? Are they building a culture that values authentic leadership? Or one that punishes it? Those answers aren't coming from statements. They're coming from actions. And right now, every action says the same thing. That leadership at the top is afraid of what Shedeur represents. Not because he's arrogant. Not because he's reckless. But because he's independent. Because he's good enough to not need them to validate him. And that is what they fear most. Because if Sanders succeeds without their blessing, if he rises outside their plan, it forces everyone to question the plan itself. And that's a threat to their control. To their structure. To the illusion that they always know best. But the thing is, they don't. The leaks prove that. The inconsistency proved that. The fanbase waking up to the pattern? That definitely proved that. What's happening here isn't player development. It's player suppression. And it's being done to protect people who don't want to be challenged, even when that challenge could change the future of the franchise for the better. At some point, they'll have no choice but to address it. They'll be forced to explain why a quarterback with Sanders' profile was benched while the team scrambled through mediocre performances. Why a leader who had the respect of the locker room and the community was cast as a backup while fans begged for answers. Why the Browns chose to protect the status quo instead of investing in what was clearly a rising star. And when that moment comes, the excuses won't hold. Not the injury. Not the timing. Not the game plan. Because the truth is already out. And once the truth is out, the only thing left is accountability. So where does it go from here? Either the Browns correct course and finally give Sanders the opportunity he's earned, or they double down on the silence and let this spiral into a full-blown organizational failure. But the window is closing. Because Sanders won't stay quiet forever. Not in terms of performance. Eventually, the work he's been putting in will speak louder than anything management can spin. Whether it's on this team or the next, he will be seen. And when he is, the league and the fans will remember how long it took and how hard this team tried to stop it. Like this video if you see what they're doing. Share it if you're tired of the cover-up. Comment if you believe Shedeur Sanders deserves more than the politics he's being buried under. And hit that subscribe button. Because the clock's ticking in Cleveland, and the moment of truth is coming fast.